Hey everyone, welcome to the CyberHub Engage podcast. James Azar here, your host, back from the road, and you get a sneak peek into my little office that is Muhammad Ali knocking someone out right over my left shoulder. I will not take that down. Our other office is full of Kobe Bryant. For those that have been watching all week know that I'm a huge Kobe fan. And so Muhammad Ali, Kobe Bryant, two great athletes, two incredible competitors. And that's why we get into cybersecurity. Welcome to Friday's wrap up. It's the end of the week, but it's also the end of the month of January. We're wrapping a month of the new year already. It seems like just a few days ago, we were talking about what this year has to hold. And now we're literally starting to count down to RSA. With that being said, I got Dan DeCloss. I said it right this time. Dan was so kind 2 weeks ago to be like, at the end of our Friday wrap up, he goes, James, it's not DeCloss, it's DeCloss. I'm like, why didn't you ever fix me, Dan? So I want to apologize for the previous 4 times I butchered Dan's last name. First of all to Dan, then to our audience. Dan, welcome back to this Friday wrap up. How's it going?
Hey, doing well. Thanks, James. Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad to have you back. I was thinking about you all week this week. Like, everywhere that I was learning, I was like, man, I got to get Dan's input on this, right? I just don't want to be like, bother them by texting you every like 10 minutes. Like, do you see this? It's just becoming a lot. And we've got a lot of great topics to talk on today's Friday wrap up. I really want to kick off with a breaking news story coming out, according to the Associated Press and Reuters. The NSO group, the cybersecurity company out of Israel, is under investigation by the FBI for allegedly spying on U.S. citizens illegally. That kind of puts into perspective this whole idea of ethics in cybersecurity. You know, I mean, we all know the story behind NSO, but what's your take on this? I mean, what does this mean for the industry? That a headline breaking news story on a Thursday night is a cybersecurity company that's under investigation by the FBI.
Yeah, I mean, it's big, right? And I think that, you know, being in the industry that we're in, there's a lot of people that we there's a lot of gray, right? And there's a lot of like, it's easy to cross the line, right? And so trying to, as an industry, because we're so young, trying to draw the line, right? And I don't know all the details of the investigation, but definitely I think that from an ethics perspective, you know, every company needs to really evaluate, like, hey, what is it that what are we trying to accomplish? And I think, you know, from what I understand of the NSO is that, you know, that their business model is truly to be able to sell secrets and those kinds of things. So it starts to become worrisome, you know. And so I think, I mean, obviously, if the FBI is starting to investigate that means that they've really found something that could be pretty serious.
So I'm gonna real quick, because this is a breaking news story, folks. We're recording this on Thursday night. You guys are gonna hear it first thing on Friday morning. And so Dan hasn't had a chance. Dan, I'm just gonna go over some of the highlights based on the breaking news report from Reuters. Allegedly, the probe started in 2017 when they were trying to learn whether NSO obtained from American hackers any of the code it needed to infect smartphones, specifically people within Google and Apple who may have been giving them some source code into the devices in order for them to develop the spy software that was used. Allegedly, the NSO tool itself was used to hack 1,400 users on WhatsApp. NSO is currently kind of saying, like, we don't know of any of this. And DOJ and FBI are essentially saying that at the moment we're not really going to talk about it. The keyword being Pegasus, which was their software that they were using to install it on smartphones. They were selling it to nation states, specifically not corporations. So the ethics of selling to nation states these kinds of tools, there's arguments to be said for both sides of that. How does that really kind of fall into place as an industry? Do we self-regulate? Do we wait for government to do this? I mean, where does this kind of fall for us as an industry?
Yeah, that's a tough one because, you know, I used to work in the government, so knowing that you have that there just going to be tactics and techniques that you're going to be developing to achieve the mission that you're trying to achieve. But like, when a government agency starts to buy these from private companies, I really think it starts to cross a line that is very dangerous, because then there's motivation for these companies to become unethical, right? To find ways into other organizations, stealing intellectual property. I mean, stealing source code, that's a big deal, right?
Well, that's an insider threat thing, right? I mean,
Right.
that kind of brings it up and center that these guys weren't just a cybersecurity company. They really went after employees at Facebook,
Yeah.
at Apple, at Google, to try and get idea of the development process in order to be able to build a tool that could be used to spy on those messaging.
Yeah, and so I mean they're basically employing the tactics of, like, as if they were a nation state, to gain the upper hand, so that they can then go sell it back to whomever, and hopefully it's not the highest bidder, but that's where we end up, right? And that I see this in the marketplace for zero-day exploits too, right? And that's why I think that having some ethics and regulations around what you can and can't sell to governments, especially things like source code, and being able to hack in or backdoors, is a problem. So I don't know the answer in terms of self-regulation versus how we can step in. I mean, it's interesting, I guess, that the FBI has, I mean, the NSO must have some kind of presence in the United States for them to be able to investigate, unless they're just doing an investigation but can only just issue some kind of extradition if they find people guilty or something like that. But
Yeah, I think the
since it's an
cooperation,
Israeli company.
yeah, the cooperation between the U.S. and Israel on this kind of stuff is obviously probably some of the best that's in the world. Israel's already extradited a numerous amount of hackers. Most recently, the guy behind Card Planet, Alexei Burkov, who was just pleaded guilty earlier this week to operating the marketplace, Card Planet. So I'm less concerned, I guess, with the fact that we can extradite them. I'm more concerned with the insider threat and the ethics behind doing stuff like this, and from a security perspective, uh, the zero trust. I hate to use that buzzword, but the zero trust model does come up here significantly
Mhm.
when stories like this break in. But you started to you kind of gave me a great segue into exploits and zero-day exploits. This month, if we wrap up this month, we wrap up this week, my lord, from Citrix to Windows to Azure, all these exploits, all these vulnerabilities, how do we start to manage this? I mean, just the vulnerability stack all by itself is tiring, and I don't have to do any of the patching. I'm just tired looking at it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's the age-old problem, right? Vulnerability management and exploit development. I mean, we're always going to be in this cat and mouse game, and it really comes down to proper hygiene, both in your vulnerability management program, in your security program management, and how often you're doing penetration testing and code reviews, and keeping up to date on all of these things. And so, being able to have a way to track and manage all these is important, because there's so much code getting written, right? And every time the code gets released, you're probably releasing vulnerabilities. So how you're managing that in a methodical way, and being able to keep track of all of the different issues that have been reported throughout that life cycle are critical.
We're watching these exploits and these vulnerabilities continue to get discovered. What we're noticing is that there's so many exploits and vulnerabilities that hackers don't even know that half of them exist until someone goes out and puts it on ZDNet or
Yeah.
somewhere else. What do you attribute that to? I mean, how do you realize, how does a CISO begin to manage these vulnerabilities and exploits? And how do companies that produce this software, like Citrix, like Microsoft, Amazon, and others, really start to get a handle on this and really communicate this in a way that becomes really effective? Because if you remember, when we started this month, one of our first Friday wrap-ups you and I discussed was the NSA essentially letting everyone know, hey, we found the zero-day exploits. We got to
Right.
get patched. And so we're starting to see kind of this being addressed, but going back to my question, how do we, what do we need to do as an industry? What does, software companies need to do? What does CISOs need to do? And what does business need to do in general?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, let's start with the software companies because, they're always going to be the ones that are going to get the brunt, right? People like Adobe and Azure and Citrix and all these people, because they're the ones producing the code that we're actually operating on, right? And so there it really comes down to your software development life cycle. I mean, vulnerabilities come down to code at the end of the day. Some code that has been written that can exploited. There's other administrative and technical controls that can come into play there for exploits. But for the most part, we're talking about software. And so having a secure software development lifecycle is always going to be more and more important in speeding up how quickly you identify those bugs, and then being able to track those to completion to make sure that that they don't get released into the wild, or that if they have been identified after production, that they get patched really quickly. So so from a software development lifecycle perspective, you need a way to track all those issues. Things like PlexTrac, where you can actually bring in those vulnerabilities and assign them to people and be able to know who's fixing them, and having a good way to analyze your progress on that. From the system perspective, that's harder because you are at the whim of the software that you're running, right, in your environment. And so you really have to pay very close attention to what is coming out every week, right? What's coming out every day, and how do we patch this, and what is our patch management life cycle. And even from the PlexTrac perspective, being able to identify, like, hey, we've got these low-level vulnerabilities, but this just now came out today. This actually should bubble up in priority. So being able to have a central place to track all this information is vital, and that's the mission that we have at PlexTrac.
When we talk a lot about, and thank you for that, I think when we talk a lot about, kind of like vulnerabilities and zero-day exploits, one of the key aspects that we always notice is it's coming from the software side, and CISOs, security folks, don't always have control over the software that's used by business. You're
Right.
oftentimes almost paralyzed by it, because it's really not up to you. It's up to operations. It's up to finance. It's up to marketing. It's up to sales. It's up to your clients and your vendors. And so, should there be a more kind of community approach to this kind of stuff beyond just announcing a vulnerability publicly? Because that's one of my hardest as a CISO, and then as someone who runs this podcast, is, do I talk about this exploit or do I not? If I don't talk about it, then I'm doing a disservice. But if I talk about it, I risk talking about something that someone may not have enough time to patch, and it ends up being taken advantage of. Like, that's my moral dilemma every single day, right? And I'm almost to the point where I'm like, what could we do as a community to get these exploits under wraps, and really kind of, instead of just publicly disclosing them, and a lot of times creating unneeded pressure and expense on a lot of these organizations, right? You go through something like this, you end up having to explain it to your shareholders, to so many different people, PR nightmare, employees. I mean, the cost of it is increasing the cost of doing business. It'd almost be easier if we could just do it kind of closed in. What do you think of kind of like just having a close-knit community of people who really, are able to deliver this across an entire enterprise and an entire global market?
That would be fantastic. It's hard to imagine, that you could have enough people in that network that you get critical mass of remediating the vulnerability on time. I mean, like, without having it disclosed ahead of time, right? I mean, I think, coming back to that NSA exploit, that was actually pretty impressive, because they had already notified all the DoD agencies, and they were already primed and ready to roll out the patch as soon as it was released. or as announced, or maybe, let's see, maybe they would already patch, I forget. But
they already patched it
yeah.
before. Like they essentially had everyone in DoD patch it. Then
Right.
they realized that industry was heavily relying on it as well, and they probably needed to let industry know because it was a 0-day exploit.
Right. And so when you have like something like the federal government where they're sworn to secrecy, it's easy to be able to have that kind of like, hey, this is, we're going to patch this, and then we're going to announce it. So you'd really have to find some kind of structure in the private sector where you could have that level of secrecy, like, hey, this is happening, in almost like a vetted group of like CISOs, right, or something like that, where it's like, hey, we're gonna roll this out. We have our trusted inner circle that's gonna get this patched before anything is disclosed. And that, so that would be one approach. I mean, it might be kind of an idealistic situation, but I mean, I think it's something worth, like anything, if it's worth it, continuing to pursue it so that we can make progress in that arena. But I agree. There's always that dilemma between, hey, even as like security researchers, how do you handle the disclosure process with a vendor, and making sure that they're doing their job, but you're not jeopardizing all, like, because we're not the smartest security researchers in the world. There's somebody else out there that likely has already found this. So there's always this. That's always the dilemma that we're going to have in our kind of in our space.
Yeah, that's, I know a bunch of security researchers. I got to tell you, a lot of them do their best to ensure that it doesn't get disclosed outside to that company directly before they even go public with it. I think the only times I've ever seen them really go public with something is if they've been ignored by the company they're trying to notify.
Yeah,
you've got a
exactly. vulnerability.
Then they scream it to the world because they go, "Hey, assholes, pay attention."
Yeah. And that's like that's been the biggest discussion in our space is that kind of like, what's the standard? And I think we've come to a good standard on the disclosure policy, right, around, you disclose it to the vendor, you wait a certain amount of time, and if they don't respond, then you follow up. I mean, you do everything right, and then you're kind of shifting the responsibility away from the vendor to, hey, now we got to get the rest of the public aware of this. We know we're opening it up now to people that will exploit it, but at least to this way, there's now enough pressure and critical mass to actually come in and put pressure on the vendor to patch the issue.
Absolutely. I kind of want to wrap up today with the report earlier this week that kind of became a trending thing for people who are peddling cyber insurance on LinkedIn. The whole doubling the ransomware between Ryuk and Sotonokibi, the amount of people who are paying more, and so forth. And insurance companies would rather you pay than actually fight it. The ransom has doubled. Essentially, it's $47,000 now. It's like $99,000 a ransom. They're making a ton of money doing it. Have we just given the ransomware industry, the ransomware as a service industry, a pretty much open book to just come after businesses, knowing that now the modus operandi of it all is we're going to negotiate and we're going to pay you, and then go away?
Yeah, this one's tough. I mean, I don't understand like how people can justify paying that much of a ransom. I mean, clearly they feel like it's worth it to recover whatever data they have or get their information back. But you keep paying the ransoms, they're going to keep escalating, and at some point you can kind of realize that they're really targeting the people that are choosing to invest in other things than their cybersecurity program. I mean, that's a sweeping statement, and there's going to be exceptions, but for the most part, you're going to talk about small to mid-sized businesses that aren't investing in their cybersecurity, and then they get hit with ransomware, and it's a critical issue that they could have to go ahead and end up paying. So I mean, if they had actually taken that money and invested it in their cybersecurity program, they have a much better chance of avoiding this ransomware. And it just comes back to the adage of like hygiene, education, and investment from being from the C-level, right, from the executive staff.
That's so true. It's the most interesting aspect of all this is that apparently 95% of the decryptor keys actually did retrieve information, actually did bring people back all their data, right? So you're seeing that these criminal hackers, and I'm gonna call them criminal hackers. I'm not gonna call them hackers because I feel like that was a debate I had this week on LinkedIn, and so I'm one that always is willing to take some feedback to help progress our industry. So I'm gonna call them criminal hackers because that's what they are. They are criminals. If someone kidnaps your kid and says, "Hey, pay me 50 grand, I'll give you your kid back," and you pay him 50 grand and you get your kid back, no one goes, "That's an honest hack. That's an honest kidnapper right there." You know what?
Yeah.
Keep doing that stuff.
He kept his word.
You brought the kid back,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I feel like that's what sometimes happens through some media outlets where they somehow end up making these criminal hackers into glorified. Well, they're honest people. They said they were going to give you back your data and they did. But the whole thing is, how about you just don't encrypt and take away my data to begin with? Let me operate in peace.
Yeah, right? Exactly. Yeah.
The fact that this is doubling, should there, one of the things I was hearing in a discussion earlier today and even yesterday was that the federal government should go in and make it illegal to pay ransomware. Do you think that's a solution?
I don't know. I mean, I think that's a hard. I mean, then you're just crippling it on both ends, right? Because if you're a company that has no other option, and then now you're breaking the law to try and get your data back. I mean, I don't think that makes sense. You're only hurting you're making the victims be a victim twice at that point. I don't know that like having a law is going to actually, I mean, a lock only keeps an honest man out, right? so putting another regulation on something like this, I don't see how it benefits the industry today. I could be wrong, but.
No, I mean, you're right. I mean, a gun-free zone is only gun-free to law-abiding citizens. If someone wants to walk into a gun-free zone with a gun, he's going to walk into a gun-free zone with a gun. I mean, it seems like, when we debate this solution, it apparently seems evident that in cybersecurity, in order to really create some sort of legal deterrent to cyber attacks, requires almost a unprecedented global effort, which we're not going to reach because a lot of these ransomware actors aren't just criminal hackers, they're state-sponsored criminal hackers designed to, they pay someone to be able to operate. Out of Russia, they're paying someone. Out of China, they're definitely paying a lot of people. If they're in North Korea, they got to pay it to Kim Jong-un. That guy isn't going to put on 20 more pounds by not having money, right?
Yeah.
I mean, every time I see that guy, he gets more rotund. I'm waiting for him to become a hot air balloon and just like fly over South Korea. It's unbelievable. I mean, I personally think that Iranian ransomware is at the tail end, and we're starting to see that activity essentially after the killing of Soleimani earlier this month. I mean, it's just that guy centralized all the power with him. Taking him out means they're going to lack resources sooner rather than later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But when you look at ransomware as a whole, as kind of a target to industry, what are some of our best practices around ensuring that we don't fall victim to ransomware, or that we recognize the early signs of a ransomware infection before it's actually executed, before the remote code execution actually takes place?
Yeah, so I think, definitely having proper network segmentation is something that will slow it down. Obviously, from just the backups perspective, making sure you have offline backups and everything is stored disconnected at that point. And then you really do have to invest in like a good EDR solution, right? That will start to recognize the anomalous behavior and shut it down before it actually starts doing the encryption. Now, it's not foolproof, obviously, but those are some of the standard techniques that you're going to have to deploy to truly try and avoid ransomware as best as possible. Again, but the interesting thing about ransomware is that it emulate. I mean, the way to prevent ransomware is almost tit for tat for how to prevent, you know, an advanced persistent threat type of attack, right? So I mean, ransomware from an industry perspective really starts to educate you on the attack path that someone's going to take if they're going to actually try and breach your system for actually extracting your data rather than just encrypting it and, you know, selling it back.
There seems to, there seems to be just so much to go on with ransomware, and you said something absolutely true, which is it's predominantly targeting small to medium sized companies, and it's putting them out of business. And the time has come to really, for a lot of these, I almost say this: it's time to maybe have, I don't want to say socialism in cyber, but a little bit more of a big guy protecting the little guy kind of approach with this, where, you know, if you're a big company and you've got a bunch of small vendors, maybe distributing and using some cyber resources to help them so that they can continue to supply you with the services that you need or render from them, so that it doesn't get affected and impacted. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've had this good conversation with colleagues before around just the availability of cybersecurity, right? I mean, making it more available to small and mid-sized businesses. I mean, people that don't have big budgets, and that comes all the way from the talent and the resources in the human capital to the technology. And, you know, what can some of the bigger cybersecurity companies do to make their solutions more affordable, you know, in some capacity to those that can't afford it but really need it, right? I mean, you are starting to have a caste system in some regards that, you know, you've got people that have a lot of wealth and can, from a company perspective, and can afford to get all the solutions in place that they need to have a good cybersecurity program. And then you have the small and mid-sized businesses that either don't have the education, don't have the budget, or the talent to be able to implement a good program.
Maybe it's time to have P. Morgan or Citi or any one of those companies really go in and offer it some sort of cyber as a service to their customers that are their banking customers at a specific fee, but to ensure that they still have some level of cyber education and cyber hygiene per se.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Well, we're gonna pitch it to them. They'll be at our Dallas roundtable. So hey, how about that, Mr. J.P. Morgan and Bank of America and Citi? How about we do something like that? I think they're gonna look at me and be like, "Say what?" But nonetheless, it's an idea worth pitching, I think. Dan, thanks so much for coming on the show. I really do appreciate your time, and appreciate you and kind of sharing your wisdom and your insight into this with us. Folks, Dan DeCloss, CEO of PlexTrac. They will be at RSA, right? You guys are going to be at RSA next month?
We'll be there. Yep, we're looking forward to it.
What zone are you guys on? The north side, south side?
We're in the early stage expo.
Early stage expo.
Yeah.
That is not where homeless people do in San Francisco. That is not where I am thinking of creating a whole side note to RSA of just human feces in San Francisco. A petition to RSA. Get us out of San Francisco. Please. Let's do this in Los Angeles. Let's do it in San Diego. No one will complain if we moved RSA from San Francisco to San Diego. Not a soul in the planet will complain.
Yeah, I'm there.
Heck, let's do it in Seattle. No, well, how about not? Let's do it in Denver.
Yeah.
Let's do it in Denver. Denver's a great city.
In February, you may not get as many people, right?
San Francisco is a shitty city in February. I was born and raised there. Okay. Let me tell you something. If the idea is that people escape the winter to come to wintry San Francisco in February, that is a flawed idea.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I lived in Monterey, so we had a lot of the same Bay Area weather.
Yeah. Fog, just
chilly, just bone chilling, right?
Right. And you're right next to the ocean. It's the Pacific Ocean, and by all means, it's cold. The Metro Atlanta Chamber, just kind of an off note to close off, they always get a boat on Pier 39. Like, that's what they do, and then they host people at their boat on Pier 39. And every year I go, why do you keep doing this? This is so hard. Like, no one wants to come to a boat. And last year, you know, the ocean, you know, Micah can attest to this. The ocean was really, you know, it wasn't like the years past. There was a little bit more waves. That boat was moving around, man. That boat was moving around. You were, you know, we're drinking bourbon, like shots, drinking, like you were getting seasick. You know, on a boat on a pier. So
yeah.
Nonetheless, petition to move RSA from San Francisco to San Diego. I think we can all agree that's a great city to do that in.
Hashtag it. Let's go. Start the movement.
Start the movement. We got it right here. It's kicking off right now. Move us to San Diego.
Yeah.
All right, Dan. Thanks so much for being on.
Hey, thank you.
Listening. Thank you so much for joining us this week. Tomorrow we have a very, very special episode on our Saturday wrap up with Patrick Benoit and Mark Hopt, leading up to our roundtable and live podcast in Dallas next week. Next week we will be in Dallas on February 4th for our live podcast. Thanks to our sponsor Armor for hosting us and Remediant. And then the next night we will be at the private CyberHub Engage. No sponsors for that one, folks, because it's only for CISOs and it's no sales. And so if you're a CISO and you want to join us, we'll be hosted by the great guys over at DataBank. Mark and his team will be taking us into their beautiful facility in Plano, Texas for a private CISO roundtable. You can contact myself or Micah to be part of that and apply to attend. We will be closing off registration very soon for that roundtable. Same thing with the podcast. Get your tickets now. They're free on Eventbrite or at our website at cyberhubengage.com. All right, guys, and a big shout out to our sponsors, PlexTrac. Make sure you go download their 30-day free trial. It's available right now on our website or plextrac.com/cyberhub. It is the best platform for managing your vulnerabilities, for ensuring that you don't have an Equifax boiling under your hands where you're not patching and you're not handling your vulnerabilities correctly. That's right, I said it, Equifax. I'm from Atlanta. I can say it. I was a victim. I get to say it 2 times over. Plus, I'm not getting any money. Jeez. All right, that's it for today, folks. Have a great weekend. I hope you enjoy your January. We start the countdown to RSA on Monday, and we'll look forward to seeing you guys at RSA. We will be at Fogo de Chao the entire time at RSA, so you can come by and say hi to us. That's right. We'll be at Fogo de Chao, Brazilian steakhouse, across the street from Moscow. You can check us out there. We're so excited about that. Until then, have a great weekend. I'm going to sign off. Enjoy your Friday. Shabbat Shalom. And we're out.